All right, to continue with the basic shapes. So far I've just drawn a wedge. It was the biggest, simplest shape that matches up with that lamp. And it's okay if you make a mistake. You don't need to erase, just redraw over it. Now, I'm going to draw a guideline. Because especially in symmetrical objects like this, and I have a bit of a shaky guideline this morning, especially in symmetrical objects like this, a guideline will help me make sure everything is placed correctly. Basic shapes are really simple to understand, but it's all contingent on their size and their placement. So now what's the other big shape? Well, it's an oval, a very thin oval at the top here. And if I look really carefully, and I'll do this in a different color just so you can see, there's actually a really thin oval at the bottom of the lamp too. But the difference is I don't see the top half of it. And so I do what's called drawing through. I'm just setting my eraser settings here, should I want to use it. But generally, don't worry about making mistakes or erasing. I just want to make it clear for you right now. These are just sketches to understand basic shapes. So right now I have these three shapes: a wedge, an oval, an oval. Doing some more, we keep the biggest, simplest shapes first. Let's do this oval. See, drawing through the stem, not worrying so much about the flat edges. If I wanted to, I could do an oval at the top, a rectangle in the middle, an oval at the bottom. But I don't need every single detail to understand how this lamp is structured. And then there's actually a little diamond or square right there and a triangle right here. And another wedge shape here. Those are all the shapes I need for this lamp. And should I want to repeat it and draw it for myself, I am now in a much better informed position to be able to draw those shapes and those proportions accurately. And you don't need to look any further than just a how to draw anything book to see this practice put into, or this theory put into practice. This is Foundations of Imaginative Drawing or Illustration. But notice it breaks some of the rules of observational drawing. We're not just looking at the contours. In fact, the outside edges don't matter very much. What we're looking at are the relative distances of things, and using simpler forms to build more complex forms. Simple to complex will be a bit of a mantra for us in this digital art class. And these shapes are very simple and basic, but their correct placement is not. Getting the right size, the right overlap, so that they match up takes considerable practice and patience. And not a dismissible amount of skill. But when we do that, to redraw the lamp, we indeed can make it very, very predictable. And if we're working on an animated series, drawing someone's characters over and over again, drawing our own characters over and over again, we want to make sure that we get it right. We want to make sure that we have control. Now, Digital 1 and Digital 2, you can apply this to any character you find, any object you find. So I'll demonstrate it here on Bandit, again on a new layer, so it's like tracing paper over the top. And we just use simple shapes first. The ovals, the rectangles, the wedges. Working basic to complex. His ears are actually pretty complicated with a square and a triangle in both. And then you see, once you have those, they are easily reproducible. And then they give you kind of the template and the map. I shouldn't say easily. They are reproducible, more accurately reproducible. And they give you the template and the map for redrawing that character in the position you're copying, but also in other positions. Because you'll see in this attitude sheet, there's repeats of the same shapes over and over again. Because indeed, this is how that character works. This position makes it look like he's peeing on something. So if that came up in the story, I could refer back to this. So if we look at him in this position, we'll see those same kind of shapes. The square and the triangles in the ears. The two big ovals for the chest, and the hips. The wedges for the haunches and the forelegs. And the ovals for the paws. Over and over again. Same shapes. When this relates to human characters, it becomes even a little bit more prescriptive. And we're more sensitive with humans. So we actually have our own kind of figurative template that we use for humans, which splits the head, as I recommend we do for animals as well, into a cranium and mandible shaped like this. Circular cranium, and then a mandible that's like a mask that hangs underneath. Notice for younger characters like Johnny here, his cranium is going to be the same circular size, but his mandible will be a little bit shorter, a little bit rounder. Then I'm going to draw a guideline through the middle of his head and through his eye line. Then we can continue that guideline down through the pelvis to mimic the spine. And then we can draw baseball-sized joints to understand where the character's pivot points are. Their rib cage, which takes up the bone. Connect their rib cage with the collarbone. Notice that the elbows line up with the bottom of the rib cage in human characters to give stability to the form. A pelvis. And then basic shapes for everything else. So even without looking too much, I know the proportions of this person. That's the skeleton. And Johnny would be something like this. Though I might not get his exact pose correct. He's going to line up in a cast sheet on the same line as the other characters. And this gives me what's called head scale. How many heads tall is Johnny Quest? Well, I take his head here, do it with a different color. I see how many of those to the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then how many of heads tall on the adult? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's pretty true of classic American cinematic storytelling. Our hero's head scale is usually larger than life. The international average for an adult male or female is 6 heads tall, but our cartoons and superheroes and things are 8 heads tall or more. Think of them like Greek myths. Right? But because Johnny's younger in this world, this is the established head scale for a full-grown adult, so Johnny's only going to be 6 heads in this 8-head world. Then other characters are going to be, 7 heads, different versions. But their cranium size all matches up. So what if I wanted to add a new character to Johnny Quest here? Because what I'm asking Digital 2 to do is come up with their own characters. Well, what if I want to use more kind of contemporary, this was done in the 60s, 1964, contemporary designs. I'm going to go for the big monster. I'm going to keep the same cranium size, but I'm going to make him like 12 heads tall, which is something that no narratives did in visual culture until the 90s. The 90s, great decade of excess. So I might make his jaw bigger. And then how am I going to get all that length? Well, I'm going to move up his collarbone and make him a whole lot wider, because all these rules are meant to be broken. Give him a big, broad rib cage like this. This is like a Hulk kind of character. Or to go from the 90s, a doomsday character. And it still needs to follow certain rules. And the rules are very simple for figurative illustration. If it's going to look human, the elbows need to line up with the bottom of the rib cage, and the hand needs to fall beneath the hip and above the knee. And now I've got the basic shapes for him. How do I now, with basic shapes, build him up? Well, I might use a different color here on a new layer. Once you have basic shapes, let's say this is my cast, right? The craniums are all the same. Head scales are vastly different. Their widths can be vastly different. But now I can build up with basic shapes and flesh them out. Maybe he has crazy anime hair. Makes him easy to identify from a distance. And why am I having Digital 2 draw this on the computer instead of drawing it in their sketchbooks? Because the computer affords a few useful tools, right? So what if I wanted to play with this head scale? I could take this body. We're going to be learning how to do this in Digital 1 in this exercise. And I can say, okay, I want him that wide, but I don't want him as tall. So let's shift him down to there. And how do I like those proportions? Oops. Yeah, I like that. So now let me draw his head the right size, but down there. Now he looks a little bit more threatening. And this is a head scale of about 5 heads wide, which, if you're familiar with the DC animated universe, is the head scale they use for their male superheroes. 8 heads tall, 7 to 8 heads tall, and 5 heads wide. So they look like big triangles. But then for their female superheroes, they use 8 heads tall and 2 heads wide, which is equally exaggerated and inaccurate, but that would look like this. And that's why they have impossibly thin waists, because a real human is 3 heads wide. But they still follow all the same rules. Elbows line up with the bottom of the rib cage. Hands fall beneath the hip and above the knee. And if you want exact accurate proportions, the hands outstretched would fall at mid-thigh, halfway between the hip joint and the knee joint. So a female character would look something like this. Johnny Quest is not the most enlightened female based cartoon, but in 90s standards, this would be kind of the male standard, this is the female standard. And you see how the 8 head scale feels left behind. This is actually more of like a 9 head scale, which, by the way, is how fashion design is done as well. All right, so those are the basic shapes of humans. That's for Digital 2 to play with until they get their first exercise, which should look like this. 3 basic shapes that they're happy with. You don't need any details to know if these are compelling or not, these relationships. And if I wanted to throw an animal into the mix, let's give them a pet pig, use the same cranium size, but everything else can be different. And I usually design animals from the side. There we go. And then they can all relate together in one big happy family. So Digital 1, what do you do? Well, we're taking our characters that we found, and most simply, we just want to trace them. That's it.